Symphony Tacoma, and looks like tonight my co-host will be Lola, who is fast asleep. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that all of our speakers today, as well as where our orchestra rehearses and performs, they take place on the traditional homelands of the Puyallup tribe. The Puyallup people have lived on and stewarded these lands since the beginning of time and continue to do so today. Symphony Tacoma recognizes that this land acknowledgement is just one very, very small step towards true allyship, and the symphony is committed to uplifting the voices, experiences, and histories of the indigenous people of this land and beyond. Symphony Tacoma this year is celebrating our 75th anniversary. So we have been in your community for 75 years. We are thrilled in just 30 days to be welcoming you back into the Pantages Theater on October 23rd. We have an amazing, amazing program set up for you featuring pianist Charlie Albright and featuring compositions by Patrice Rushen, Shostakovich, and Tchaikovsky. Right now, we do have our subscription tickets on sale, and single tickets will go on sale starting next week. And with that, we will also want to make you aware that between October 1st and 10th, we'll be having our virtual silent auction. So we hope that you'll consider supporting Symphony Tacoma during this time, and also letting you know that on October 8th, we'll be having a performance beginning at 7 p.m. to discuss a little bit about what we have going on with our silent auction, as well as what the funds that we're raising for Symphony Tacoma go towards. So we hope that you're able to join us on October 8th at 7 p.m. Before we begin our program, I would also like to thank our sponsors, Multicare Health Systems, as well as Tacoma Creates. And now, without further ado, I would love to introduce to you Pacific Lutheran University professor Greg Youtz, who is going to be our host this evening. Hi, Greg. Thanks so much for joining us.
It's always fun to talk about Symphony Tacoma, one of my very favorite topics. So let me welcome our audience, both those who are joining us live at this very moment and those who may watch later on the Facebook and YouTube channels of the Symphony. Welcome to the 75th anniversary year of Symphony Tacoma, and welcome to this evening, the first of 6 episodes of a history podcast that we have put together. We're going to be celebrating the various eras of Symphony Tacoma, and we're going to begin this evening with a kind of an overview of the whole period, which actually goes back quite a ways before 75 years. So the next one will follow on October 6th. I think the next one's in November sometime. Then we take a little break and we do February, March, and April. So I hope you'll join us for all 6. And if you want to go back and watch one again, or if you want to recommend it to a friend, they will, of course, all be on the Symphony's Facebook and YouTube channels. Tonight, as I say, we're going to do an overview. The way it's going to work, I'm going to introduce our special guest this evening. She has prepared about a 15-minute slideshow that's narrated, that she has put together, and then we'll talk about it a little bit afterwards, and then it will be open Q&A. And even while we're talking after the presentation, feel free to jump right in. There's nothing formal about this at all. So without further ado, let me introduce my very special invited guest this evening. This is my friend, my colleague, and my publisher. Yes, you heard that right. One of my publishers. This is Kim Davenport. Kim has quite an astonishing resume, and I'm going to read notes here because I don't want to forget anything. She spent most of her adult life, I think it's fair to say, in Tacoma. Her dad, Michael Davenport, was a native of Tacoma. He went to Lincoln High School. They still live in the Lincoln district in the house. You can see, Kim, your 1922 house there. It looks like you're in the warm glow of a fire. Like, I'm sitting here in the 1959 knotty pine paneled room that I inhabit. Kim got her undergraduate degrees in piano performance from the University of Washington, and then went off to Northwestern University and got her Master of Music in piano performance. She returned to Tacoma and has had a whole variety of careers. This is really quite a Renaissance woman. She was one of the administrators at Urban Waters. She was the director of the Tacoma Historical Society and now their communication manager. She's been teaching and administrating at University of Washington Tacoma since 1999, teaching all kinds of music courses. She's now also teaching at University of Puget Sound. She runs her own piano studio from home, and she reports that her students range from little kids to age 52. But of course, the core of Kim's artistry has always been at the piano. She and her father, Michael Davenport, who I might add was truly one of the world's foremost performers of the bass clarinet, they made numerous tours of Europe, performing brand new works, many of which they had commissioned and which they recorded and which they published. And so they formed Alia Publishing and Recording in 1997. That is still very much a going concern, and therein come some of my compositions for bass clarinet, which Kim has published, much to my gratitude. She has worked extensively as an accompanist and collaborative pianist with singers and instrumentalists, choirs, orchestras around the Pacific Northwest. Her latest project is learning, performing, and publicizing works by underrepresented composers, underrepresented pieces. And if you want to know more, just follow her Facebook feed, and she's constantly introducing new things to us on her Facebook page. Just this past August, she did a marvelous recital at Lakewold Gardens in their Music from Home series, and performed a whole series of African-American composers. He is also an author. He has written 2 books for the Arcadia Publishing Company. This is the one that you sometimes see where sort of different neighborhoods have their histories written with lots of photos. She's done that both for the Theater District and the Lincoln District. And most recently, she published her book called Sounds of Our City, 21 Musical Tales from Tacoma History. And that is published by the Tacoma Historical Society. And you can find any of those books in many places here in Tacoma. She's also written for Columbia, which is the magazine of the Washington State Historical Society. So you can see why when Symphony Tacoma was looking for kind of an in-house historian to help us tell the story of Symphony Tacoma, we immediately thought of Kim Davenport. So welcome, Kim, to this podcast.
Thank you so much. I just hope I can live up to that introduction.
Well, Kim, we know from all of your musical research on musicians and performances and venues in Tacoma over 100 and some years, we knew that you knew where to go to find all the pictures and all the stories. So tonight we're asking you to give us a kind of a broad overview from the beginnings of classical music in Tacoma up until the present day. And in subsequent episodes, of course, we'll dive more deeply into different eras. So let me just ask you to set us up. What are we about to see? And then we know you have about a 15-minute slideshow for us.
Yeah, so what I was trying to do with this video was share sort of the overall story of the desire of people in Tacoma from its earliest European settlement, the arrival of the railroad, bringing people from other parts of the country to Tacoma. There was always a desire to have music on a grand scale. And that, of course, meant a professional symphony orchestra. And so that's been a vision of people in Tacoma for a lot longer than what ended up being the successful accomplishment of that goal with the formation of the Symphony Tacoma. So this video that we'll see will start back in the 1890s, and we'll learn about some failed early ventures to set up a professional orchestra, and then learn about really the whole history of that 75 years of Symphony Tacoma.
Okay, so let's take a look at this slide presentation, and we will meet again at the other side.
Dreams of a professional orchestra for Tacoma, one which both serves its community and puts the city on the artistic map, date back to the 1890s. Early Civic boosters knew that before Tacoma could truly become the city of destiny, the New York of the West, or any of the other grand names given to our young city, musical achievement at the highest level was a necessary part of the landscape. The first efforts to form a professional orchestra in Tacoma began when Swedish-American violinist and conductor Olaf Bull arrived in 1890 to serve as conductor for the new Tacoma Theater, a venue dubbed the finest temple on the coast. He fell in love with the natural beauty of our region, even becoming the first person to play the violin at the summit of Mount Rainier. Although he had offers to continue his career in other cities, Bull remained in Tacoma for the rest of his life and was involved in several efforts to form a professional orchestra for his adopted hometown. In those early years, fundraising proved difficult, and his fledgling orchestra, the first to use the name Tacoma Symphony, never quite got off the ground. The next attempt came with the formation of the Tacoma Civic Orchestra in 1925. This community ensemble was founded by David P. Nason, director of music curriculum for the Tacoma Public Schools. Where Olaf Bull had failed to pull together enough interested musicians and financial support to build an orchestra, Nason succeeded, at least for a time. For membership in the volunteer orchestra, he recruited not only professional musicians, but also some of the more talented students from Tacoma's high schools. He programmed the Tacoma Civic Orchestra's concerts to include the same pieces students were studying in school, and frequently collaborated with local radio stations and music stores as well. In spite of Nason's energy, musicianship, and expertise in building community relationships, the orchestra folded just a few years after its creation, in 1928. In September 1933, a talented young conductor named Eugene Linden hitchhiked from Portland to Tacoma with $5 in his pocket and a plan to start his own orchestra. Tacoma, he later explained, was, quote, the only place on the Pacific coast that could support an orchestra and didn't have one. Linden never doubted he would succeed, even in the thick of the Great Depression. Just 3 musicians attended his first rehearsal. According to Linden, quote, no musicians would have been a failure. 3 was a beginning. Within a few months, he had assembled an ensemble of 65 musicians, with initial rehearsals held at Ted Brown Music and the Winthrop Hotel. The new orchestra's first concert was held on March 17, 1934. The musicians were amateurs, and they were performing on a temporary stage in a school auditorium, but their performances of Mendelssohn and Beethoven were welcomed by the audience of 800 with a 15-minute standing ovation. The Tacoma Philharmonic Orchestra was born. Musicians were not paid during the first 2 years of the organization's existence. Linden donated his time as well, commuting, sometimes hitchhiking, from Portland. Linden continued to conduct the Tacoma Philharmonic even during the turbulent World War II years. By 1951, facing budget challenges, the Tacoma Philharmonic's board of directors decided to become a presenting organization. This meant that it would no longer support a resident orchestra, but rather would bring touring musicians to town for concerts. Each of these early efforts to sustain an orchestra in Tacoma ultimately failed. It was not until December of 1946 that a performance of Handel's Messiah at the College of Puget Sound would establish an ensemble which would grow and change with our city for the next 75 years, the orchestra known today as Symphony Tacoma. That first concert was led by conductor Raymond Vaught, professor of violin at the College of Puget Sound. The school's music department invited all people in the community with any instrumental talent to consider joining the orchestra. Over the next decade, with the steady sponsorship of the college, the orchestra presented 3 concerts per year, with CPS students performing alongside community members. In 1959, violinist and conductor Ed Safarian joined the faculty of the University of Puget Sound and took the reins of the UPS Tacoma Symphony. Ed and his wife Jan, an operatic soprano, had never even heard of Tacoma before making the move, but would devote the rest of their lives to expanding musical opportunities for students and audiences here. Safarian's immediate priorities were to raise artistic standards and broaden publicity. He was adamant about 2 things. Concerts would have free admission, and the orchestra would regularly feature internationally renowned artists as soloists. This unique combination would set the Tacoma Symphony apart from its peer community orchestras around the nation. All of this work required financial backing, and the Tacoma Symphony Women, a group organized in 1964, stepped up to fill this important fundraising role. Hosting everything from luncheons and tea parties to an annual holiday homes tour where guests could hear musicians performing live as they visited grand homes in the community, the Tacoma Symphony women were successful in multiple ways. In addition to raising the funds needed to keep concerts free, the group also raised the profile of the orchestra in the community by holding their events in spaces throughout the city. Throughout the 1960s, the orchestra performed in a variety of community venues, from churches and school auditoriums to the large stage of the Temple Theater. Safarian's programming continued to highlight both local musicians and world-class visiting artists, and premieres of new works by local composers occasionally graced the stage alongside more traditional orchestral repertoire. In the spring of 1971, the ensemble performed for the last time as the UPS Tacoma Symphony. When the next season opened in October 1971, featuring a world premiere by Tacoma composer Leroy Ostransky, the orchestra taking the stage was now called the Tacoma Symphony Orchestra. Although the University of Puget Sound continued to provide support for many years to come, this was an important step in establishing the orchestra as an independent artistic organization. During the 1977-78 season, thanks to the collective efforts of the Tacoma Musicians Union, Local 117 of the American Federation of Musicians, orchestra members were paid for the first time, another important step towards professionalizing the orchestra. In 1983, the Tacoma community celebrated as the historic Pantages Theater reopened following renovations, becoming a new home to the Tacoma Symphony. By 1986, free admission was no longer possible, but Ed Safarian had successfully overseen the orchestra's transition to a professional ensemble with widespread community support and a stunning historic theater to call home. In March of 1994, Safarian conducted the orchestra for the last time, stepping down after 35 years. During the 1993-94 season, several guest conductors led the orchestra's concerts as part of a nationwide search for Safarian's successor. On September 30th, 1994, Harvey Felder took the podium as the new conductor of the Tacoma Symphony, a position he would hold for 20 years. Maestro Felder brought to Tacoma a professionalism, charm, and compelling artistic vision that together would continue to raise the profile of the orchestra. His mission was to create a Tacoma Symphony sound, one defined by artistic vitality and rhythmic precision. Felder, passionate about youth education, greatly expanded the Symphony's youth concert program. He also oversaw the development of the Tacoma Symphony Chorus, now called Tacoma Symphony Voices, and expanded the number of concert offerings each year. Upon his departure in 2014, Felder was given the title of Conductor Laureate.
"20 years is a long time for a music director, and I guess the average for music directors is 7 or 8 years, and so I've doubled that and some. So clearly, this is my home. This is a body of work, represents a body of work that helped shape me and shape my musical sensibilities. So leaving this will be a major change, a major life change. I didn't think it would be 20 years, but this was a different situation. This was being hired to build something. It was a project.
Harvey came with a mission to the board, and he wanted to create a sound that was Tacoma Symphony sound.
What I was very concerned about initially were the fundamentals of music making. Precise rhythm, accurate rhythm, a rhythm that gives the ensemble a vitality, The next step, ensemble. Having a sense of this side of the orchestra, very aware of that side of the orchestra. Sounds basic, but it wasn't necessarily in place at the beginning. I will miss Tacoma and miss the patrons and the people who've supported the orchestra over the years, and miss the orchestra members. So yeah, it'll be a major transition.
Last time.
In 2014, Symphony Tacoma welcomed music director Sarah Ioannidis, whom the Los Angeles Times has called, quote, one of 6 female conductors breaking the glass podium. Building on the orchestra's long tradition of serving its community, Ioannidis has continued to expand the orchestra's education programs. She has also championed new works, often through collaborative projects with other artistic organizations in the Tacoma community.
How can we go anywhere without music? How could we take music out of human nature? It's part of us, and that's why it's so important. Music is just so life-affirming. When we hear something and we are moved to tears or inspired, we know it touched something in us. To my students, I'm their teacher. For my children, I'm their mother. To my orchestra, I'm their conductor, and I'm music director of Symphony Tacoma. I'm constantly motivated, I'd say inspired by people, by stories, by history, by where we live, the extraordinary nature of our world. I've done all sorts of projects musically, as a performer, as a collaborator, as a curator of programs. I really love commissioning works, bringing creative new pieces to light. When I look at creating projects, I'm really connecting the dots, and I look to the resources of what does the community love, what does it care about, what does it have. Recently we did Beethoven Nine. This is just as important as it was in Beethoven's day. You know, brotherhood and sharing of our common understanding. And this is where we have to look, is to the common ground. I'm motivated by the mission. And for me that mission is helping us understand each other, and music is a greater tool as any. I think that is the greatest thing that music can do, is to bring people together, mind, heart, and soul.
As Ioannidis begins her 7th season as music director, the orchestra's core season now includes 6 main series classical concerts, holiday choral pops, an annual performance of Handel's Messiah, and a spring choral concert. With a stated mission of building community through music, Symphony Tacoma celebrates this diamond anniversary season and looks forward to many more years of sharing music with the people of Tacoma.
Well, thank you, Kim Davenport, for that, what I consider to be really major gift to Symphony Tacoma and all of its patrons and audience members. That is just a wonderful overview.
Thank you.
I'm so excited that this exists, and of course, I want to remind people that this will exist permanently on YouTube and Facebook, so you can recommend anybody who wasn't here. Just send them there, and they can watch this marvelous, brief but really exciting overview. Kim, just before we open it up, I wanted to ask you just a little bit about how did you do your research for this? Where did you find all this information and all these images?
So I have to start by saying that I, of course, come from a musical family, as you mentioned, that's very rooted in Tacoma. So I will share just briefly. My grandmother was a piano teacher here in Tacoma in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. On the other side of my family, that was my father's mother. On the other side of my family, my mother's great uncle was an opera singer and teacher in Tacoma earlier in the 20th century. So I, over the past several years, have really enjoyed both exploring my own deep roots in the city, but also using music and music institutions and music education as a way to explore that. But specifically to answer your question, Tacoma has such a wealth of wonderful resources when it comes to local history. So from the Northwest Room at the Tacoma Public Library to the archives at University of Washington, University of Puget Sound, to the Washington State Historical Society, we have images in that presentation from all of those sources. And honestly, I just have fun because I love local history and I love music. I have fun exploring that on a daily basis. And so to be able to bring together some of the stories I heard as a child from my parents and grandparents about, the history of music in Tacoma with my current interest in researching local history, this was really just a pleasure to put together.
Just one more question from me before we open it up to the audience. You mentioned at one point at the very beginning of the video that founders of cities all over the western part of the United States, these brand new fledgling cities, they all wanted to put their cities on the artistic map. What is it about an orchestra that people seem to think was important to be considered a real city?
Yes, it's a big question, but I think it's an important question. I think a fledgling city like Tacoma trying to say, this is the New York of the West. Literally, that was a slogan that was used back in the day. New York, of course, had a very established, cultural scene, right, including an orchestra and opera company and things like this. And an orchestra is seen as a benchmark of is there enough support for culture and the arts that it can support that number of musicians and putting together those programs, not just a piano recital or a violin recital, but a full stage full of musicians. And that was definitely on the minds of a lot of the initial boosters of Tacoma, none of whom were musicians, right? They didn't come at it from a musical perspective. They just came at it from a perspective of, we need to show that our city can compete with other major cities and do the same things that those cities can do, whether it's in terms of commerce or whether it's in terms of culture. And so I think that the Symphony Orchestra is the measure of, is a city really a true center? Can it support a professional orchestra?
That's great. I was sort of peripherally involved in the foundation of the Auburn Symphony Orchestra in the mid-90s. And, I recognize that same spirit, that Auburn wanted to be more than someplace between Tacoma and Seattle. It wanted to be a place. And one of the ways that you do that and attract people and businesses is by having your own orchestra.
That's right.
So I have to say, I'm looking forward to the future symphony orchestras of Ruston, Fircrest, and University Place.
It must be. It's inevitable, right?
Gig Harbor.
Yes.
Well, with that, let me open it up. Anybody, if people out there have questions, I'll be happy to relay them to Kim. Just any responses you have to this presentation or this idea, this topic. Julie Dunbar, my question is, as a historian, what insights can you provide so that Symphony Tacoma can write a phenomenal future for its next 75 years? Wow, that's a big one.
That's a good question. I think the main thing that I learned from this project, I mean, as I mentioned, I grew up hearing stories. I grew up hearing stories about Ed Safarian and many other early figures from Tacoma music history. What I didn't realize until actually engaging with this project was how unique the deep community partnerships are in the history of Symphony Tacoma. So the fact that it was supported at the College of Puget Sound and later the University of Puget Sound, and we had members of the community who were not professional musicians playing alongside people who maybe did make music their career. This organization has deep community roots. And, moving from the long career of Ed Safarian, who did come in that time when it was really a community-based orchestra, not professional yet. But we've seen that continue with the new leadership, that there's a lot of community outreach and input. And I think that's vital. One of the things that I know from other research I've done into other, music history around the country is a lot of orchestras are, what's the one that comes to mind? I think it's Boston, if I remember correctly. Oh, no, Chicago. That's the one that I remember. Chicago Symphony, of course, is one of the great orchestras in our country. They were founded by a single donor, a single rich man who said, here's the money, form an orchestra. And they have a great legacy from that. But I would argue that the legacy of an organization that is deeply rooted in the community with the efforts of many, many people making it happen over many decades is a richer tradition, potentially, in terms of engaging music with the community. And I think that's the legacy that Symphony Tacoma needs to continue over the next 75 years. That's a great question.
Yeah, so it's rare that an orchestra or any kind of artistic organization can be kind of imposed from above.
Right.
If it doesn't have that kind of real roots support.
Right.
Yeah, and of course, Symphony Tacoma's motto, or one of them anyway, is building community through music. So
That's
I
right.
think that word community is really at the heart of everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions from the audience?
I will jump in and say that it really is true that Olaf Bull, in addition to doing a lot for early music in Tacoma, did climb Mount Rainier with his violin and play violin at the top of Mount Rainier. I did not exaggerate that in any way. It's a great Tacoma story.
That is a great Tacoma story. All right. Well, I think we can call it an evening. This first episode of Symphony Tacoma's 75th anniversary series of 6 podcasts. This one, our guest, Kim Davenport, with an overview. The next one will be on October 6th, and we will be talking about the Ed Safarian years. And isn't it nice, now that we've seen Kim's video, we all know what that is, from the late 50s through the mid 90s. And so we now have our bearings as we go through the rest of these 5 episodes. Let me just remind people also that the next event, besides that October 6th history episode, will be followed 2 days later by on October 8th by our virtual online silent auction. Karina mentioned that a bit earlier, so join in for that. And then on October 13, I will be back online for our music mixers. Our audience knows that we try to gather live before the concert and meet the soloists and the conductor and talk about the music, but we've decided to do those online for reasons of social distancing. So that will be October 13 at 7:30 online, and I will be chatting with Patrice Rushen. If you don't know Patrice Rushen, please go back and check your jazz piano charts from the 70s, your R&B vocal charts from the 80s. This astonishing musician has done it all, and now she's writing orchestral music. And so we will be talking to her about her influences, her traditions, as well as, of course, Charlie Albright, who's one of Symphony Tacoma's favorite guest pianists. And he will be joining us, I believe, by video from Korea, where he is on tour. And then on October 23, of course, we all get to meet each other again in Pantages Theater. So that will be very exciting. If you want to keep up with all of these kinds of events this year, please go to the homepage of Symphony Tacoma, scroll all the way to the bottom, and click on the link that will sign you up for the e-newsletter, and that'll keep you informed. Of course, you can also simply follow the Facebook or YouTube channels of the Symphony, and you will be informed. So with that, we will leave you this evening and look forward to seeing all of you at some of these upcoming events. Thank you once again, Kim Davenport. I give you a virtual applause.
Thank you so much, Greg. It was really a pleasure.
Good night, everybody.